I'm excited about the example he'll be sharing with us and for the future of our city as we value, invest in, and improve our public spaces with commodity, firmness, and delight. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron. I appreciate it. I'm so glad that you continue to be a sponsor, and thank you for your service on our board of directors. I have really enjoyed getting to work with you and getting to know you better. And Matt, thank you for your year as chair. What a terrific experience it has been, and we're moving our community forward with your leadership, so thank you as well. So fortunate to introduce Jeff at this time. He is a homegrown talent, a graduate of Holy Rosary Elementary. How's that for digging back into a person's past? And on to Duluth East High School, where he graduated in 1997, and then on to UMD as well, where he earned his graduate degree in political science and in communications. While at Duluth High School, as a 10th grader, he began working at the DECC as a door guard. So in 1995 and so, he has been with the DECC for all of this time, 25 years, except for a short period of time where he was doing, as a part of his undergraduate work at the University of Minnesota Duluth, he did a study abroad program in Sweden in the fall of 1997, and that was a one-time. Within these past 25 years, he has not been a part of the DECC. And so he climbed within the ranks at the DECC from technical services manager to building services manager, hockey operations director, and then in the fall of 2011, he became the Bayfront Festival Park director. And I remember back in 2011 when Mayor Doty came to the DECC board and made an appeal to the DECC's leadership, Dan Russell and the leadership team there, and I was on the board of directors at that time. Mayor Don Ness said, "We are really struggling with Bayfront Park. We're really not in the business of organizing this kind of a venue. Do you think you can take this over for us?" And we at the DECC were confident we could do that, because that's kind of what we do, is to make sure we can provide entertainment and venues and gathering places for our community. But we are also very confident we could do it because we knew we had the ideal person within our ranks to lead this Bayfront Festival Park, and that was Jeff Stark. And so he took over at that time and revitalized the park. It was really in a desperate situation for those of you who can remember. There was an occasional event there, and it was really something when something was going on a particular weekend down at the park. And now we know it is something that in a routine and customary year is full every weekend and oftentimes throughout the week as well. And it's because of the revitalization that Jeff brought to that park. And so we as community members are so very fortunate that since 2011, he has been leading this community treasure, bringing vitality and energy and resources to it. And we are so fortunate today during this virtual luncheon to have him be our keynote speaker and have him update us on what is happening down at our community's gathering place. So welcome, Jeff Stark. Great to have you here and looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much, David. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate LHB's work on this building. There's not a spot that we go to here that we don't see the work that you guys have put into this as well too. So appreciate the sponsorship. I'm going to share my screen here, so bear with me as I do that. All right, it should be up and running. So I think my favorite part of this so far is I get to have not only the David Ross introduction, but I get to keep that in perpetuity because this is going to be recorded. So I can show that to my family and friends someday and show that I really was somebody once upon a time. So thanks, David, for that. So David mentioned I'm currently the Venue Operations Director and Bayfront Festival Park Director at the DECC. I deal mostly with large-scale ticketed events, UMD hockey, ice operations, and then, of course, programming at Bayfront Park. I did start as a usher, ticket taker, and door guard back in 1995, and I will be celebrating my 25th year of employment. My anniversary will be in September of this year. I make my home in Duluth's Indian neighborhood with my life partner, my wife, Laura, and then our 2 children, Sansa and Brant. And for you Game of Thrones fans, that is Sansa Stark that lives with us. I was born and raised in Duluth, so I know kind of the community and the city. It's in my blood. I am a cake eater, so I'll apologize for that right now. I attended Duluth East High School, graduated in 1997, and then went on, matriculated to the University of Minnesota Duluth. So I did take a job at the DECC when I was 16 years old, and I thought I was just going to be here for a year or two, and it ended up turning into a couple more years. And I said, well, I'm just going to get through high school and, move on to college and go seek my fortune elsewhere. And then I ended up going to the University of Minnesota Duluth for communication studies, and ended up through college. And then I said, well, I'll probably go somewhere else after this, but I got hired as a full-time manager back in 2003, and I have not figured out a good exit strategy yet. Part of my current role as Bayfront Festival Park Director came about back in 2011 after the Amsoil Arena came online. I worked on that for about 3 years with Dan Russell and did a lot of the nuts and bolts planning. And at that time in 2011, Dan Russell, the executive director, former executive director, asked for volunteers to start work getting Bayfront to live up to its potential utilization. And so he did this long speech and was explaining what we were setting out to do. And I look around and I realized everybody else had kind of taken a step back, and I was the last one left standing there. So I kind of inherited it that way. But in all honesty, we had just finished a 3-year construction project, and we'd gotten through the first full season of events. And I've been working closely with all the promoters and touring agents and production folks, and probably had the most contact and experience putting those large-scale events together. So it was a natural progression to work over in Bayfront and kind of put the stuff that we've been working on for the past number of years when we were programming Amsoil Arena and the DECC Arena to use out there. I'm going to delve into a little bit of the history of the park. This is an interesting story. You can find this stuff on zenithcity.com, which is a website run by Tony Durkins. Bayfront Festival Park and the DECC, the land that it sits on, was one of the 11 original platted townships in Duluth, and it was called Fremont Township. If that picture looks a little weird to you, it's because, and I'm going to use quotes here, this is from 1856. Unfortunately, most of Fremont was actually, in quotations, driftwood and accumulated vegetable matter. After a big storm in May of 1873, a large portion of Fremont floated out into the shipping canal, and the press called it Meander Island as it blocked the harbor for a couple weeks. After that, the site was backfilled with dredged materials, and for the next 100 years, it played a role in Duluth's working harbor. So that takes us to the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. There were infrequent events that occurred on Bayfront Festival's site property. In this picture, this is probably from after 1986. You can see the William A. Irvin dock behind the deck and the Old Flame restaurant where the aquarium now sits. But this is the Airstream gathering, and this had multiple decades. You would see this site as you came down where I-35 currently sits. The Airstream gathering happened all the way up until the late 1980s. Then we see in the mid-1980s, we had the first 2 cyclical events that happened. One of them was Duluth's Fourth Fest. And I'm showing this picture on the left. This is from the 1988 fireworks display that unfortunately went off a little too early and had the grand finale and the beginning all at once. So Dan Russell was in charge of that fireworks display. We never let him forget about it. But that's been a successful event over 30 years now. Fourth Fest was one of the original ones. That was founded by Tracy Lundeen. We also had one of the original events, Bayfront Blues Fest. That started in 1988 and was founded by Chris Mackey, Tracy Lundeen, and Chuck Poet. So they've been the granddaddies of that space. In the 1990s, we saw very infrequent use of the park. There were some acts that came through, like the Monkees, Doobie Brothers, and then one of the last events of the 1990s, and one that kind of showed us what the potential was Bob Dylan and Paul Simon. That occurred on July 3rd, 1999. Saw over 20,000 people through the gates at Bayfront Festival Park. And it had its successes. Obviously, that many people coming down there was a glimpse of what we could do with a properly laid out and effective festival park for the summer season, and what sort of economic impact that sort of festival grounds could have. But if you look on the right picture here, you can see that it is a big dirt mud parking lot, and it did not drain well. They ended up having to bring in a ton of hay in order to have people get in there. But the potential and the spark of an idea was definitely placed. So moving forward, we had Duluth Mayor Gary Doty had approached Lois and Gino Palucci to pitch the idea of creating a recreation center along the waterfront. Lois called and basically said within 24 hours that she would put up $2 million to create a world-class park for Duluthians to enjoy. So with that funding in place, design pushed forward, and the current iteration of the park came to fruition. That design work was done by Randy Wagner from DSGW, and it has now become an iconic portion of the Duluth harborscape. If that wasn't good enough, in 2003, Lois Palucci doubled down and decided that it's not northern Minnesota if you don't have an ice skating rink, and put up another $350,000 for the construction of the Bayfront Family Center, also known as the Warming House, and it has an attached ice rink that's next to it. So the charitable contributions that Lois put forth basically gave us this modern park laid out so that we can do all of the events that we come to know here throughout the summer season. The original park, the $2 million wasn't quite enough. Like all good projects, the design ended up going over budget to the tune of about $3 million. And without hesitation, Lois Palucci put forth another $1 million into that. So all told, there was over $3.5 million investment from Lois Palucci. And that, I'll go back actually, the stage pavilion is named the Lois Palucci Stage Pavilion, and there's plaques that are there, and we remember her contributions every time we have an event down there. So David got into this a little bit, but from 2001 to 2011, despite the tranquil harbor setting and updated amenities, traffic did not increase. We were hoping that there would be a major uptick in concerts. Some of the factors that were at issues were a complex array of permitting that was needed, fee structures that were difficult to navigate, and competing interests that the private promoters that were tasked with running the park had with their own operations at the same time. So we get to the deck management of the park. In 2011, Mayor Don Ness was concerned about the perceived lack of activity at Bayfront, and sought out Dan Russell, the former executive director, to institute a new management plan that would streamline the promoter's experience by bringing booking, contracts, and event planning all under the DECC umbrella. And I try to show this picture as much as possible, because how often do you get to see a picture of Don in Lederhosen? He absolutely loves this picture. We took over planning for the 2012 season and had a grand total of 9 events. We immediately went to work on a marketing plan that unified the voices of all the disparate events into one single Bayfront Festival Park. This included full-page newspaper ads when newspapers still existed, a single website, social media channels, and billboards as well. So we do a number of billboards down in the Twin Cities metro area in partnership with our friends at Visit Duluth. There are approximately 6 digital billboards that have our entire schedule of events that go down there, full page advertisements in the News Tribune, both online and in print. And we hit the ground running in 2012. We added a few more events that year and then learn the business firsthand and try to get through that first summer. One of the first events that we had worked on creating was with the Minnesota Craft Brewers Guild. That was the inaugural All Pints North. It was a small affair at that time. It was, I think, about 40 brewers, and there were about 1,500 people that attended that first one. The planner that we worked with and laying out that first craft beer festival and kind of maybe putting Duluth on the craft beer map was Laura Mullen. And if folks know who Laura Mullen was, her and her husband, Colin, had dreams of starting their own brewery with the Tonus family. And that dream that they had and the first events turned into Bent Paddle Brewing, which they embarked upon a year later. So I'm not going to take credit for Bent Paddle Brewing coming into fruition, and Bayfront's not going to do that, but it probably did not hurt to prove that Duluth was fertile ground for that craft brewing boom back in 2012. Another event that we saw the creation of back in 2013 was a small little band from Duluth called Trampled by Turtles. They've been playing in Pizza Luce and needed a bigger stage to play on. So they came to Bayfront Park in 2013, and that would go on to become an annual event. We saw record numbers back in 2018 after they went on a brief hiatus. They started out with about 3,000 people the first year in 2013, and we had our biggest event in 2018 with 10,000 people attending. We also probably think we had kids under 12 free, so we might actually had about 11,500 or so in there, but don't tell the fire marshal. That's more than the population of Cloquet. That's more than the population of Hermantown. And we fit all of that in. We had a little minor problem with the lines that we sorted out for the next year, but we were able to do that with all the parking infrastructure and the ramps downtown and effectively got people in and out. So we also saw in 2013, the prodigal son from Duluth returned home with his Americana-Rama tour, which featured Wilco, My Morning Jacket, and Richard Thompson Trio. So that event was another one that pushed the positivity forward and showed a lot of other people in the business, promoters and talent agents, that we could do events on that scale and that Bayfront was a viable option for them. Some other events that had outgrown their space and moved forward with joining us at Bayfront Park in 2013 were the Boys and Girls Club's Grill Wars. That was sponsored in part by Midwest Communication, and that has gotten bigger and bigger every year. We've also done a couple iterations of Tall Ships. 2013 was a banner year for them. I think that was probably the record attendance back in 2013. We've seen waning numbers of the last couple of events that Tall Ships has had, but 2013 was probably one of the largest events that Duluth has ever seen, and Bayfront handled the slack with an entrance and festival component to that as well. And then this is another kind of interesting story. We worked with the folks at Kern & Company to start the Duluth Hot Air Balloon Festival. In 2012, we had an Oktoberfest that was scheduled to happen in September, and the owners of that event informed us that they were canceling about 2 weeks prior to the event date to concentrate on opening one of their new restaurants. So we launched into making our own replacement Oktoberfest that would be promoted by the DECC and feature all the local breweries. But the hot air balloon folks at Kern wanted the same date. So we ended up merging the Craft Brew Village into the event. We had already secured a large portion of the folks that we needed. And to come full circle, in 2019, Kern & Company created the Duluth October Festival on those same dates. And we saw really good numbers for that. And we're very hopeful for 2021 that that event is going to grow and potentially be doubled, if not tripled in size with the amount of tent space that they're bringing. So if you're looking for an authentic Oktoberfest, keep an eye on those September dates in 2021. Here's some additional events. I'm not going to read through all of these, but there is a ton of things that we've been putting in there, and these are just a few of the highlights, not to mention many more. Some of these ones are done in partnership with a lot of folks in the community. The Duluth Police Department has their Kids, Cops, and Cars event down here. We've done a number of events with the folks at Twin Ports Entertainment, like Bayfront Country Jam, Rib Fest, Beer and Brats, and then a number of other regional promoters have come in here too. So Hopefully you've seen a couple of those. I know David was at the Bone Thugs and Harmony concert. That's one of his favorite groups. So we'll see if we can get those guys back here in the next couple of years. So all of these events would not be possible without the ones that came before them. There are the older siblings, the established events, we call them. And those events have been going on for more than a decade. These promoters have invested thousands and thousands of dollars, sweat, and time into basically making these community events for Duluth, and then paved the way for the most recent renaissance over the last 8 years that we've experienced. So events like Bayfront Reggae and World Music Festival, Duluth Superior Pride, Lake Superior Harvest Festival, Art in Bayfront Park, the Tribute Festival, Fourth Fest, again, that's been going on for 30 plus years. It's also part of our responsibility to put that on annually on behalf of the city of Duluth. And then another event that we put on is Party in the Park with Hairball, which has turned into, I guess I would liken it to a all city, all area high school reunion. It is the strangest crowd that you can come across. It's split pretty evenly with 20 somethings on one side and 30 plus folks on the other side. And it is a great people watching experience. And that typically happens the day before the 4th of July on July 3rd. But one of the biggest events that really set it all up for us and proved to everybody that they could do this year after year was Bayfront Blues Festival. And under the stewardship of Chris Mackey for the last 30 years, and I think he's owned it primarily himself since the mid-90s, that has really set a precedent for what can be done and what scale can be accomplished at Bayfront. So I wanted to take some time to thank these established events and basically kind of showing everybody else the ropes and being gracious with their time in sharing expenses and basically telling folks the tricks of the trade and the secrets that they've got in order to make these things happen. So it felt like we hit our stride in 2015 and we didn't look back. Some of the complaints were that, you know, nothing ever happens down there to, wow, there's something every single week. With the increased usage of the space, we've had to explain why there's loud music on a lot of summer nights. But the sounds that are emanating from Bayfront are not maybe welcomed by all residents. It's really a siren song to all the other folks that come in here, and it helps fill our hotel rooms, restaurants, and other establishments throughout the summer months. But what good is a summer without the winter, since we seem to live in an eternal winter some of the times here, or at least it feels that way. So we can't talk about the venue without having some functionality in the winter. And one of them, and that's synonymous, is Bentleyville. Bentleyville has been on site at Bayfront since moving out of Nathan Bentley's home in 2008. And it has steadily increased in visitors. They saw roughly 300,000 visitors in just over a month's time last year. And that starts in Thanksgiving and goes through the New Year's. It is a critical time frame for us in the city of Duluth when we've got not a lot of other things happening as far as tourist draws. So to have those 300,000 people come in the November and December season really provides critical visitors and hotel guests and restaurant goers and shoppers that all keep our economy humming in typically what had been a slow month for tourism prior to 2008. So I want to thank Nathan for his contributions. And I know that I've had frequent conversations with Nathan, and they are planning on doing a 2020 event if it is feasible for them. So we're really excited that they're going to take the time and energy to put into that and hopefully deliver that same strong tourist season for us in 2020. Another example of a community-led programming event, Finding a Home next to the harbor, came in 2016 when Bayfront hosted Hockey Day Minnesota. For one day of the year, Duluth was the epicenter of the hockey world, and programming on millions of television screens emanated from the shores of Lake Superior. The impact that type of media exposure brings cannot be purchased, and it equated to an almost 12-hour love letter to the city of Duluth. So what's the secret to making all this happen? I get asked that on a regular basis, and realistically, there's no magic recipe or formula. It's about building relationships over the years. It's led to a number of events going from daydreams to concrete economic engines that drive our short summer season and provide big city entertainment in a smaller market. It prevents those dollars and folks from leaving the Duluth area and heading down to the Twin Cities or other places. And that actually brings in other visitors. The vast majority of our guests come from the Twin Cities metro area. And the first couple of years, it was tough to sell to promoters and other folks. But once we get an artist or a promoter here, that picturesque setting with the harbor and the aerial lift bridge in the background and a conveniently placed 1,000-footer boat gliding behind the stage usually probably does a better sales pitch than anything we can put into words. Once Duluth gets in your blood like that, the experience provides the word of mouth and testimonials to the other artists and agents and bookers, and those folks in turn deliver more people that are here. So it's really taken some time to do that, but we've reached critical mass. You know, we also view ourselves as true community partners and look for opportunities that might not be present in our lineup as we search for new programming. Bayfront is a public treasure, and it's something that we want to make sure that we have something for everyone in our lineup. We try to create a diverse set of events that reflects on the interests of our community and gives each resident something that they can hopefully identify with on our schedule. We've slowly brought every event under one roof and worked to form partnerships across multiple events and dates to reduce the infrastructure costs through shared expenses. And then the biggest thing that we do is we offer complete event support from the initial planning and budgeting phases all the way up to on-site support and post-event feedback. We've basically taken everything, put it under one roof, and marketed the park as a whole. And lastly, we are a steward for the city of Duluth. It is a city of Duluth property, and we are the managers of it. Without the support of the mayor and the city administration, Bayfront would not have the resources it needs to be successful. We've got a dedicated group of parks maintenance staff that keep the grounds immaculate. If you come down here, it's a public park 95% of the time, and people experience it that way. And we do the events there the other 5% of the time, which most people can identify it with. But if you want to come down and take your dog for a walk or go for a stroll or head over to Pier B and grab a beverage, you certainly can. And the park is a great way to come through there and experience it just as a public park property. We also have some dedicated Parks and Rec employees that provide activity out of the Family Center all summer long. And then our partners at the Duluth Police Department, they work all these events side by side with us, from getting the liquor permitting set up to providing security, and they're really equal partners in Bayfront's success in our area. Here's kind of a brief timeline that we talked about in the history. In the 1990s, it was a city asset with no permanent management structure. It was a dirt lot with that cement stage. You could, if you're old enough, you can remember the yellow tent that was there. I really want to strike that Lois Bellucci's gift is what spurred all of the development and really pushed the programming of Bayfront and the ability of all of us to attract these large-scale events to the forefront here. And that gift does not, if that doesn't happen, we're not where we're at today. So I kind of harken back to, we had 9 events that were on the books. We finished with 12 events in 2012. This past season in 2019, we did 40+ event days that were occupied. We filled up every weekend back in 2014. So all of the weekends from Grandma's Marathon all the way through mid-September, when we give up the park to Bentleyville, are occupied now since 2014. And then we hit a record-setting year in terms of events and attendance. We did 140,000 folks through the gates in 2019. Back in 2018, we did 110,000. So we also had a ton of concert one-offs that were there. Last year was 311 featuring Dirty Heads and the Projectors, Steve Miller Band, and Marty Stewart, OAR. And then we created a couple of the new cyclical events that we'll hope to see back here in 2021, Bayfront Beer and Brat Fest, Bayfront Country Jam, and then our partners at Grandma's Marathon brought Wednesday Night at the Races back down to Bayfront for the first time in a number of years, potentially since that yellow tent was in place when we saw that picture at the beginning of the slides. and Rib Fest. That's another Twin Ports Entertainment one. So it's not all rainbows and butterflies. There are a lot of challenges that come with the site. The single biggest one up until this year was weather. Duluth has been incredibly blessed with warm days and blue skies for a large part of July and August, but we also have a handful of those rainy days and temporary lightning postponements that have happened on a number of occasions, but I think it's been under 5 or 6 in the past 7 or 8 years. It's not the most enjoyable part of the job to have to shut down a concert and evacuate the park, but our proximity to the deck and the ability to shelter in place inside the venue here till a storm passes has saved quite a few shows from canceling. Ticket buyers are also notorious for waiting until the absolute last minute to buy their tickets. A good example of that, one of the most recent hairball shows that we did, we walked up over 5,000 people the day of the event, and that puts a tremendous strain on the box office and security teams. We've been able to utilize a lot of technology to deal with these crowds and have a good idea and really good data now that we've done enough of the events to see what attendance is going to look like for most of the events as well. So we can kind of predict that with an alarming amount of alacrity. We've been a victim of our own success here to a degree. We're probably turning away more potential shows because there's only 12 to 13 viable weekends in the summer, and they're all spoken for. As tastes change and events wane, we're excited to add more programming that draws larger crowds to some of those weekends, but we've got a very finite resource in the amount of weekends that we've got to offer. Another thing that's problematic is that there's some opportunities for new shows to establish themselves, but it's on those non-weekend dates. So we spoke about that a little bit, but one of the other limiting factors for new events is just the amount of infrastructure costs that's associated with putting on a show. It's not a glamorous thing to talk about, but things like garbage, recycling, fencing, security staff, sound, lights, tenting, and everybody's favorite porta potties, they all add up to a very large expense bill. So a lot of times you're looking at, without the artist expenses baked in, the amount of money that you're paying the artists, the site setup fee can be about $15,000 to $25,000. So we try to work with the promoters to share expenses where they can and help them with that budgeting process, and then incubate those events as they're smaller and establish themselves. But it does take a lot of dollars to put into it in order to make an event happen. My favorite is sound complaints. That's probably the only benefit this year of the reduced schedule due to COVID-19 is that I have not had one sound complaint. We do a lot of public outreach. We've had some news articles that have gone out and do some social media stuff over the last couple of years. Back in 2014, we had a Metallica cover band for the Tribute Fest that was way too loud. So we actually reduced our hours during the weekdays. We normally had closed at 11 o'clock on weekdays, and then Fridays and Saturdays at midnight. We backed that up to 10 p.m. on weekdays and 11 p.m. on Friday and Saturday, and that seemed to get rid of a lot of our sound complaints. But I guess it's a good thing too. It means that we're occupied. It means that we're moving forward and that we're programming the park. Effectively, we weren't the ones to design the park to face towards the cityscape, and it kind of I think Aaron talked about it with Roman architecture. We basically have a amphitheater at the bottom of a hill that echoes up the hill and creates kind of the perfect acoustics for the folks on the hillside, whether they want it or not. So we've worked a lot with sound companies to aim the speakers into the ground as much as possible, and we do our best with that. And then COVID-19, that's been the biggest challenge to date. It's been something I feel that we've worked more on canceling, rescheduling, postponing things this year and put more effort into the programming side of things than we ever have in the past. But COVID-19 presents some serious issues for us. It makes it almost financially impossible to have sustainable events with the limitations on crowds. There's a distinct lack of community sponsorship dollars, and obviously, first and foremost is the risk that people would have to take in large gatherings together, and we don't want to be part of the outbreak or spread of any illness to our patrons. So we've spent a ton of time trying to come up with protocols and put them in place with our public health officials, but it's really an uphill battle on programming the park. You need the the thousands of people in order to make something economically sustainable and program it out. But these events, they sustain hundreds of jobs, both directly and indirectly. I spoke about it before. Events at Bayfront really, they translate into hotel bookings, restaurant dining, brewery visits, and a ton of other purchases throughout the community. Here's a couple of events, and I'm not doing this to make anybody sad, but just what we were looking forward to in 2020 that were not able to be here with us. So we had the Avett Brothers, which would have been on July 5th. Tyler Childers would have been, is an up-and-coming country artist, would have been actually this week. Brandy Carlisle was going to be in August, and then Snoop Dogg was going to be in September. So we're missing those artists, but we've had a lot of positive feedback from agents that they're going to try to push shows to 2021. So we've got some optimism too for 2021. You know, there's a ton of dates that are held for multiple one-offs. One-offs are those concerts where it's not a cyclical event. They won't be back every year. It's just a concert that shows up on one day. They do their thing, and then we won't see them for a while. So all the artists are laid off as well too. They're all eager to get back on the road. The pricing and our buying power is going to be a lot more effective in 2021 because these folks want to get back to work. They're going to pack in more tour dates. So we're excited. We've got a bunch of dates that are held. I can't share all of them, but there's going to be a phenomenal lineup. And 2020 was slated to be our best year ever, but 2021 is shaping to be out of this world with the backlog of events that are going to come our way. And then we have a lot of opportunity to fill some of those Thursdays, Fridays, and Sundays. A lot, like I said, the Saturdays are all taken. But if we can get similar events that can utilize the same infrastructure and footprint, we will continue to fill those spaces as well as the other weekdays that are there too. So I talked about it a little bit before, but Bayfront is not just concerts. It's not just those large scale events. We also added some brick pavers here in front of the stage this last season. So we trampled a mud pit in front of the stage over the past couple of years. So there's another 30 feet of brick pavers so that folks can dance and sing and not destroy the grass there. We also have library, the Duluth Library brings some books in the park down, and then parks programming has been centralized this year so that folks can check out all sorts of parks equipment from the Bayfront Family Center. So if you're looking for something for your kids or family members or friends to do, Parks has programming there, typically every Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. And then we've got a bunch of different groups that are utilizing it for workout spaces, yoga, fit for mom, and running groups. So there's a lot of activity that's at the park. I really, really appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone about what's happened in Bayfront, and I'm really hopeful about the future and that it'll be even brighter. It's been a true pleasure to watch the community embrace all the events that occur there over the last 8 years. I think people thought it was going to be something that could never be achieved and that it was going to be empty, but we've tried to prove them wrong. It really brings a smile to my face at the end of the day, or at the end of the night when we've had an event when people are headed out to their cars and headed home to know that they've had a good experience in Duluth. Thank you very much for your time, and thank the Chamber and LHB for the opportunity to present this.
Jeff, thank you so very much.
It was a pleasure, David.
What a wonderful presentation. And I have been around long enough to see all the different iterations of this, and it is remarkable how this has expanded into such a community treasure. So under your leadership as well, I know how much you have done to make this happen. I appreciate your leadership. Thank you for being a part of this gathering and for being our keynote speaker today. This was a comprehensive, disciplined, well-presented overview of what the park was, what it is now, and what you hope it will be in 2021. So for those of you joining us, thank you for doing so. Jeff, thanks again, and Aaron as well, and our friends at LHB, thank you for your sponsorship. Matt, again, for starting us off in the right fashion, Matt Baumgardner, and all of us have come together to make this available to our members. So we hope that you have appreciated it. This ends our program. we look forward to having you join us as we continue to offer these virtually, both Let's Do Lunch and Connect at Clyde, once each month through the rest of this 2020 year. Enjoy this afternoon. Have a great day, and this ends our program. Jeff, thank you so much. Well done.
Thanks. Appreciate it. Thanks for the
Really,
opportunity.
really. And now you have that ready for future presentations, and like you say, for the record, for years to come from now. But you can just update it as need be. But I have not seen that kind of look back historically into what it was before. Fremont Park, that is so interesting. Tony Dirkins as well, what a treat he is, and it sounds like you partnered with him, or at least made use of his resources. But press on. Thank you so much, and enjoy the afternoon. Now you can relax.
I appreciate everything. We'll talk to you soon, sir.
Okay.
Bye, Chris.
Bye-bye.